question, why do people love cult films? I'm your moderator, Dr. Wesselmann, Professor of Psychology here at Illinois State University. Before we get started, I want to provide some shout-outs. First, I'd like to thank the Department of Psychology, and especially Ms. Angela Davis for helping for the help in hosting and advertising today's panel. I also like to thank the Harold K. Sage Foundation and the Office of the Provost for providing funding to support this event. And finally, I thank Adam Fox and the Normal Theater for partnering with us to bring our special guest here to ISU for this and other events that we will discuss later. In terms of today's structure, first I'll introduce our panelists. Then I've prepared some questions for us to riff on as a group. And then after about 30 minutes or so, we will open up the question to the audience, or open up the audience for questions. Now on to our esteemed panelists. Joining me in this discussion is Dr. Scott Jordan, cognitive psychologist, philosopher, and chair of the Department of Psychology here at ISU.
Man, you guys could clap.
We all need love.
We all need love.
And also,
You're a doctor?
I try hard, man.
And also we have our special guest, Mr. Greg Sestero, actor, director, and author, best known for his role in the 2003 film The Room, and for writing the book The Disaster Artist, which was adapted into the award-winning film of the same name in 2019. Please join me in also welcoming Greg and Scott.
I'm sorry.
So gentlemen, to break the ice, we're going to start with a little word association task. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say cult film? As each of us answer, the rest of us can then feel free to riff. So we will start with Greg.
Cult film, I always think of Underground. Underground, yeah.
Given the context, The Room, but outside of the context, it'd be Rocky Horror. Right, that would be the first thing that would come to mind.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying what cult film comes to
Oh
mind?
no, just what comes to mind.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so we've got underground,
Yeah.
a type of social context, and we have a specific film, iconic. And for me, I had to come up with two because I can never come up with just one. Mountain Dew, and then Joy.
Oh, I see.
So those are first things that come to mind for me.
Cool.
So why, Greg, then did underground first come to your mind?
Or actually, I would say Obsession.
Oh, okay.
I think to have something become a cult film, you have to watch it. You got to know it from beginning to end. You got to you got to have it on in the background when you're doing other things. There's very few movies that did that for me. One of them in particular was Fight Club. If you guys had a chance to see that, which is sort of about a cult, in a way, like these people that don't fit into their jobs or to their life, and they come up with something that brings them together. So I would come home every day. I was 21 or 22. I had this job I didn't like, and I'd come home and I'd watch Fight Club, make me feel better about my day. I wanted to dress like Tyler Durden. I wanted to work out like Tyler Durden. And I just became obsessed with that movie because it pulled me out of my everyday life, And so I was obsessed with that movie. I went on a road trip to Boston with this random guy I met in my acting class. Didn't even know who he was. He's like, driving to Boston tomorrow and I need someone to go along on a trip. Do you want to go? And I was like, what would Tyler Durden do? So I went, I got a haircut in Boston, I went full on. And so to me that was what a cult film is that you want to live in the movie. And it just takes over a part of your mind. You just become obsessed with it. Very few movies have done that, where I actually kind of lose touch with reality and become immersed in that world and want to be one of those characters.
Yeah, it's not like...
That's what's concerning about The Room. I don't think any of you guys should want to be any of those characters, except maybe the dog. But yeah, I think it's just sort of this thing. And Joy is definitely something that it does, but it's, obsession is what I think of.
Me? So when I hear cult film and I think of cult film, I think of having fun with friends. Because when I've had cult film experiences, they're rarely alone. But that's just the way I end up defining it. Because in some of the slides there's a lot of arguments about what a cult film is, right? But for me, it's the joy of sitting in a room or sitting in a theater with a bunch of people and sharing this experience that none of us are having to create because it's being shown for us. And that frees us up to just laugh at it, cry with it, have fun together with it. And then over time, you start throwing things at the screen, or, you know, wearing a raincoat or whatever it is that you know, because people are using squirt guns, folks. That's why they Monica Rocky or I forget. Anyway, yeah. So I think of people getting together.
So that's kind of segues into my next question, as we're sort of discussing here, is what makes a cult film? And of course, there are a million definitions, right? But we're sort of centering on some things here. There's what you brought up is this idea of social, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, one of the reasons why I said Mountain Dew was because I first got into cult films in high school, where we'd get together, me and a bunch of my friends in my parents' basement, drink an excessive amount of Mountain Dew, and we would have this collective joy,
Right.
right? And I like what you said about the obsession, Greg, because you said first, you said, you know, sort of takes your mind away from the problems of the world, but any sort of film that you get immersed in could potentially do that for 90 minutes, right? But you said that it was more than that, right? It's this idea that, you know, what would Tyler Durden do, right? There was some sort of meaningful connection you had with the characters.
Yeah, I think that there's got to be wardrobe. There's got to be it's got to be quotable.
Mm-hmm.
You got to objectivize something. Like with Fight Club, I wanted to have the soap. I wanted to find that red jacket that he wore. I mean, yeah, you see a lot of movies, you know, you don't always want to dress up like the characters. So there has to be the mix of those three. You got to have that object, you got to want to quote it.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have I been in a conversation with somebody and been quoting Fight Club and they have no idea that I'm doing that?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so I think those three things, then you start to see the t-shirts, you start to see the art. People start coming up with you know, different art of each character. So it just has to have a breath off screen that you then create. So I think but the quotes are big. Because you look at a movie like Mean Girls, I haven't seen a movie once, but it's so many people use that. They make t-shirts like "Get in, losers, we're going here." Like there's a Harry Potter one where it's like "Get in, losers, we're going to Hogwarts." So it's like, yeah, it takes on a whole new life, and I think you got to have those three things that I always look for.
So let's stick with the quotes here, right? Because you can of course quote the movie while you're watching it, right? But I like how you said you would quote it to someone else and they wouldn't get it, right? How do you feel, either of you, when you do make a reference to a film and someone gets it?
Okay. Well, again, it's sort of a little bit like Fight Club when they're like looking at each other and like, first rule, don't talk about it. Like they know amongst themselves that they're part of Fight Club. So for me, I always found it early on like really fun when they didn't get it. It's like, oh, now I'm sort of that character and I'm getting to play that. But then it's almost equally interesting when they do get it, because then you can kind of talk about what you like about the movie, and I think it opens up conversations. That's how a lot of people meet each other. I mean, for example, with Fight Club or like The Room, like people say, hey, you know, our first date, we went back. I didn't know if I liked this person, but I showed them The Room and we hit it off.
Right.
And now we're married. So I think it's one of those things that can really help connect you.
It's like the litmus test. Are we going to connect well? You like it or you don't, and you know, and it's something about, at least I found in terms of fandom broadly, but which is the cult phenomenon or a special type of fandom. This is something that one connects with, right? Like you wanted to get that coat that maybe.
I never found it, but I'm still trying.
Any cosplay creators out there, get him the coat. But yeah, it says something about what we want others to know about us, right? It's not just something we want to keep to ourselves. We want to share it, right? Scott.
So look, I got a beverage here. Okay, Big Lebowski. When I use a quote, it's diagnostic. If you don't get it, that says something about what you don't watch. Now, I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm not offended if people don't get my quotes. It's like, okay, I'm not going to talk Big Lebowski with you then. And that may lead to other things I wouldn't talk about then. It does have an impact on where the conversation goes from there. I would use the term diagnostic because I'm a psychologist, right? But yeah, I use the quotes. Yes. All is one is all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely.
Full Metal.
Yeah.
You know, my favorite cult series was the Evil Dead series. I very much love the quotable lines from Bruce Campbell's character in that series. And I remember being at this Halloween store, right, Spirit or whatever, and just sort of standing there next to these random people. And for whatever reason, I picked up like a chainsaw and I said, "Come get some," just out loud. And random person next to me goes, "Is that a Bruce Campbell line?" And I was like, "Why, yes it is." And my significant other at the time was not too far away, and she went, and she knew I was going to be there for at least half an hour talking to this dude. So yeah, and sort of fun serendipitous connections, right? Now, Scott, I'm going to pivot to a question for you. I know that the concept of cult films is commonplace now, and often described in discussions of popular culture,
Right.
but for a long time it wasn't. It was driven largely by, as we've talked about, midnight movies.
Right.
Very much a college campus phenomena, late at night. So what do you think were the factors that led to this shift from being fringe to...
Fair enough. So I honestly believe that one of the things that gets a movie to be called a cult movie is that people enjoy it together. And when you posted the tweet about this, or somebody posted the tweet about this panel, I retweeted it and said it all began with the VCR. Because I distinctly remember late 70s being in my friend's basement with other friends. We had rented Christopher Reeve's Superman. We thought that we were just going to be watching Superman. Within 10 minutes, we're all making fun of it. And we're all laughing at it. And we're all having a party with Superman, right? Of course, Superman can't talk back. But my point is, there are data that clearly indicate there are things you can do that it's very easy. Imagination requires external objects. You need to create something, put it out there, and then you can actually, once it's out there, you can use your imagination again. I think when groups have objects like a piece of art, a movie or whatever, it gives them the opportunity, since none of them have to create it, they all just kind of jointly get to create together. And if you've ever watched cult films or films in your basement with your friends, you have memories of those events, things that people, that's real life. That's not fake life because you're watching a movie, right? So I think the VCR made it possible for us to come together in small groups with movies. And then I think from there, that kind of vibed up into what you're talking about, the college midnight showing, and then Mystery Theater 2000 kind of capitalized on that lifestyle, turned it into an industry. And now with the internet, you know, it's all available to share, and watch parties on streaming services and stuff. So for me, it's about having a space you can get together with people and riff on something and create a fun atmosphere together.
I'm sort of struck by in both of your sets of answers, the terms create, object have come up pretty consistently in the way that you all are sort of, at least your own experiential view of cult films, right? Having something that you can talk about. You talk about the soap, right? Or talk about Rocky Horror, for example, or The Room, right? There's the throwing of the spoons, the footballs that allow for that interactive nature.
Yep.
It's not just a passive experience, right? And actually, let's pivot that a little bit. Greg, you know, you're most well known for The Room, which is perhaps the best example of a cult film phenomena since Rocky Horror Picture Show. You spent a lot of time at public screenings, hanging out with fans in this cult film space.
But never watching the movie.
Ah, interesting, interesting. Why is that? We'll scratch my question here.
Well,
right now.
well I will peek in because the audience is the best part.
Okay.
I mean, this stuff you will hear at screenings, it blows your mind. Like, it's just, And what's fascinating is it's been going for 20 years, and people will find a way to modernize it. Like there was a time I was in Alaska, of all places, and everyone was like drunk and having a good time. And Johnny comes back with that tape, and someone yelled, "He's got receipts!" And I was like, it made me laugh so hard. I was like, the people keep this movie alive, and this whole movie, The Room, was born from one guy. He was a young film student in LA, and he was walking by the marquee, and he's like, "The Room, is that a movie by like," he thought it was like made by a good filmmaker. The title sounds like it could go either way. And there was a review posted on the ticket booth that said no refunds. And a review that said watching this film was like getting stabbed in the head. So it's like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
He goes in, there's no one in the theater, and he's sitting there watching it. And this is a film student, he went to USC, they're always watching movies. Like 15 minutes in, he was on the phone calling his friend saying, "I'm seeing something that's gonna blow your mind. Get here as fast as you can." They watched it, he got a group, and they watched it every day for 3 days before the movie left the theater, because Tommy four-walled the theater, put it in the theater for 2 weeks, because that's for the prerequisite to get an Oscar nomination. So he put it in for 2 weeks. They got up to 100 people watching this movie, and he's like, "Why is there a framed picture of a spoon on the living room table?" Because they're like all into film sets and all that. So he's like, "Oh my God, okay, there's a spoon. Okay, I'm gonna yell spoon," and then they ended up bringing plastic spoons. So it really started, there was like a spark by this one film student who, the spoons are being thrown around the world. I mean, Japan, all over. So it's amazing that how something that small can start with just someone who has a voice in film, who sees the cult aspect in it and uses it.
So, cult films are not for everyone per se, right? And I think it's interesting that this film student you mentioned, right, saw this cue, no refunds, which suggests, okay, this is not regular, it violates expectations. And then reading a review like, "Watching this is getting stabbed in the head." Now, 9 out of 10 people might read that and go, "All right, I'm done."
Yeah.
But this person said, "I'm in."
Yeah.
So what is it about makes folks like this student say, "I'm in"?
I think that's why when they talk about cinema, you always want to hit 18 to 25.
Okay.
Because I think that's those people that are willing to go for it, willing to take risks, their minds are more open, and they're willing to experience something like that and see, and then once that sparked, Tommy would do these screenings, he would show it for free, and these film students would show up every weekend, and they would quote it, and they would just like, they got it, and it was crazy because Tommy like didn't understand why they got it. He's just like, "Oh wow, they like the movie, that's great." He just took it as like, "Oh, people think it's great." But yeah, I think they're just where they were at in their lives. It was something they would dedicate a lot of time to. They would go around LA and literally hand out postcards to promote the movie. I don't think many like 40-year-olds are gonna be doing that. Right? So I think it struck a chord with the young crowd.
Yeah, and they weren't being paid to do that.
Oh no, the movie's being shown for free.
Okay.
So they just loved it that much. And then I got a message from one of those guys. He's got a kid now, which is crazy. And he's like, I read your book. He's like, "I just want to say thank you so much for The Room. Like, we still, all these years later, 20 years later, still have a friendship because of how much we love The Room and how much it brought us together. Like, I met my girlfriend that way, and now one of them's married. They used to go to the screenings when they were like 19 or 20. He said it just became a huge part of our lives, And what's crazy is all the movies that you wanted to be in, there were studio movies at that time, didn't do that for these guys. It was just this random little bad movie that connected them.
I accidentally stepped on this.
No, I was going to say, if you're a creative type and you're open to difference and you're wanting to be a filmmaker, you want to see it all, right? You want to see both ends of the spectrum because you get a sense of, socially, you get a sense of what constitutes quality to, for the culture as well. But you just want to see how different creators are creating. It adds to your toolbox, even if you never use it. It's still, so you're going to find someone who's highly open, very creative, and if that's their area, that's where they're going to go.
Yeah, they're not as choosy as like, we want to see it
No,
all.
they're gonna check it all out, absolutely, because they're gonna inhibit their creativity by not checking it all out, absolutely.
And it's almost like the bad, weird stuff's almost more fun
Yeah.
because it's not done right. So it's almost breaking the rules, which I think is probably fun for film students.
And when you break those rules, you create new possibilities of what the rules could be at some point. I mean, that's how you create a new possibility, is by breaking the rules. So there's a lot of fertile stuff there to attend to.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because when we look at the writing in film studies, for example, on cult films, one term comes up more than almost anything is this idea of transgression, right?
Mhm.
That there are norms that we have come to expect, and these films violate them, right? Whether intentionally or not, and I think that makes it memorable, right?
Yeah, it's always a question whether or not the person came to the transgression through insight or just luck, right? But that's what's healthy about having someone like Ed Wood in the movie industry. You just get something different out there, and it creates a space for you to maybe use some of that material or not, or think that way or not. So there's space for all of it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, I know both of you create in different ways. So when I know, Scott, you write, for example,
Yeah.
and Greg, you also write and are now directing. When thinking about creating a story, then within a genre, how do you balance transgressing just a little to stand out from the rest of the pack, but also still giving people what they expect?
For me, I always try to pull from real life experience. And I think that's honestly what a lot of, cult movies are. I remember the Fight Club was adapted from a book, and he based that story after getting, I think, beat up at a campground when he was asking for something. And so that's sort of where he got the idea. So I always try to use that spark from something I've gone through, something I've seen, something that was either traumatic or fun. And it's really liberating because you can tell the true story, you can go away from it, you can rewrite it, into a more positive or negative outcome. So I think that's what people really resonate to. And I think something like The Room, I know for a fact that was all pulled from personal experience. And so we're getting to see real emotion, pain, undiscovered love in that movie. And even though it's like poorly executed, it's still, there's something there that we can connect to. So I just think true real life experience is something that it belongs to you and you can share it with the world.
Yeah, I like your comment on real life experience, because when you're going to write, your real life's going to come out, and trusting and then trusting the fact that you've been part of the culture. So when you write about your life, you're writing about the culture implicitly by what you're writing. If you're working to be transgressive, right, then you got to pay more attention to what the norm is, right? And then you have to find a way to transgress that doesn't go so far, whatever that means. Because if you're trying to be transgressive, what that's saying is you want others to and say that it was transgressive as well, right? Whereas, so like The Boys, right? Does The Boys go too far with its violence? I don't know. I watched all of it. I'll probably watch it again. But they definitely were sensitive to the norms and violence and pushed that envelope a bit. And they wanted to be transgressive, just like the authors of the comic. They wanted to push borders. And so, yeah, real life, and then if you want to be known for being transgressive or trust that it'll be, you got to pay attention to the norms.
Time here, okay. Each of you, we'll start with Scott. What is your favorite memory of a cult film experience?
Oh gosh. Well, there's the VCR experience, and then there's the first time I saw The Room at the Normal Theater. And Eric and I went. I had never seen it before. There was a lot of joy in The Room, right? And there's other ways that I've had joy. I don't know if what we call cult I would almost act as if we're sort of in a cult culture, in the sense that, you know, the movies are a way to get this vibe, but there's other ways to get this vibe, because now, like this series Supernatural, right? They have Supernatural cons, which are that for a weekend, right? Now, no one argues that Supernatural is a bad movie, though some say it's the best and worst show on television ever. But there's the same kind of being together, riffing on a character one, in terms of cosplay, wearing the outfit and being there and kind of playing those games together. It seems like something that started off in a basement with a VCR in a theater now becomes a weekend-long event. And so I've just done a lot of, done a lot of cosplay. There's a Supernatural with some friends, and there's an argument about whether or not Supernatural's is a cult flick or not. Stranger Things, everybody argues it is a cult series. This is just a lot of love and joy. People had cosplaying Stranger Things at a con in Boston a month or so ago. So I do kind of think we're living in a time that we might almost want to call cult culture. Not just a movie, but this ability to get together and revel in this imaginary space. Game of Thrones, another thing. I'll leave it at that. Because there's a big argument about whether or not Game of Thrones is a cult. Some people say it would have been if it weren't for the last season. We'll leave it at that. But I do think it's more than just cult movies now.
Cult culture, I like that. I've written that down. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dangerous phrase to use in public too, right? because there are real things as cults, right? So, you know.
So, Greg, do you have a particular favorite cult experience?
Yeah, I think mine probably has to go back to the Future. It struck such a chord with my imagination. I mean, I had hints of it already, like when I saw the first Star Wars. I recreated the whole movie with the figures.
Nice.
I spent hours recreating the conversations, the script, the Death Star. I mean, it was insane.
Did you like stop motion animation with it?
Yeah,
Oh,
did all the
cool.
conversations. My dad was very concerned. He just is like, yeah, you're talking? Or he was trying to like connect with me, but I was so far gone that he couldn't do anything. So Back to the Future, similar, I saw that and I just loved the whole idea of going back in time and the car. And I went through every newspaper and cut out like hundreds of Back to the Future photos. And I made this huge poster that took over most of my bedroom wall. And I got the speed wrong. I put 80 miles per hour, and I got made fun of a lot for that. But I tried to convince my parents that we went back in time. So I changed. My dad collected like newspaper articles that were significant, and he had like a drawer of them. So I went and got this headline that said like it was 10 years earlier or whatever. And I went out early in the morning. He's obsessed with the newspaper. That's like the first thing he'd do. So I put it up on his thing, and he opened it. He's like, "What? There's like Chernobyl's happening again, or something." Like, I picked this like historical event, and then I tried to wear like old clothes and tried to completely convince him. And he thought like this is very worrisome. But I think then so I had a knack for connecting to that. So Back to the Future, and then I live in the neighborhood where they filmed Back to the Future, and I still go on walks where like Doc Brown's house was. So something like that you never let go of when a movie, like again, you want to sort of live in the movie. And I got to meet the guy who lives in George McFly's house.
Nice.
It was random. His daughter came to a screening. And she's like, I know you like Back to the Future. So it never stops living in your imagination, I feel like. So Back to the Future was one that I just wanted to continue to bring that movie to life.
And then it comes back to what you sort of started with this idea of having a movie on, not only watching multiple times, but having it on in the background, right? You focus on it, you can just kind of have it there to cue, but you're immersing yourself in multiple ways.
It's almost like comfort. You hear the score, you can just relive it over and over.
Well, and I love also what you say about comfort, because you have memories and emotions attached to these films, these experiences, as we all do. It's almost a form of nostalgia, right? And so sometimes even just hearing a score might bring you back to that moment. You know, we were talking earlier about the Batman, for example, and how I was a big Nirvana fan growing up, and so hearing them use Something in the Way, just hearing those chords, even in the movie, I was focusing, but I'm sure the people who are not discovering, but rediscovering, I suppose, Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill might have similar experiences.
Yeah, I watch The Golden Voyage of Sinbad every Thanksgiving morning. Tom Baker is the bad guy. Tom Baker was the third Doctor Who, for anyone who cares. And I watch it every Thanksgiving because I have very vivid memories of watching it when I was 12 or so on a 12-inch black and white TV during Thanksgiving when everybody else was watching football, and that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to watch sci-fi or fantasy, so I watched that kind of by myself, and it's just the way you hear this, as you said, you hear the soundtrack, you see the images. Kind of, for me, it kind of connects me to where I've been since, right? And it's a ton of fun. It's so fun that everybody expects me to post a picture of the opening scene on my Facebook page, because now that's part of it as well, right? So very much a part of it. It's not going to leave, absolutely.
Well, I want to, I've got other things that I can ask about, but I want to also give our audience a chance. So any audience have any questions for us to riff on?
Don't be shy.
So a lot of the movies that you guys were mentioning, I think particularly I'm forgetting all of them now, sorry. But like Rocky Horror Picture Show has obviously like a very strong sexual element to it. It was the Bruce Campbell movies, Evil Dead you're talking about, especially for the time period, extremely violent, you know. And even like The Room has a strong like sexual element to it. And so I'm curious if you guys think that sort of like extremism affects the status of cult movies, or at the very least like influences why people are more attracted to those types of films.
Yeah, I think shock value for sure, because you watch the first 15 minutes of that movie and it's like nothing you've really seen. So that immediately goes like, whoa, okay, hey, you got to see this. Come here, I'm going to show you this. So shock value is huge, because if in the first 20 minutes nothing really happens that's memorable or original or unique, you just keep watching. It doesn't really strike a chord. But with something like The Room, you just can't believe, like, within 5 minutes, you're just like, is this for real? I got to find out what is this, you know? And then all of a sudden the sex scenes come, and it's just like you're either in or you're out. And I think if you're in, then you're going to want to show people, and I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, sex and violence are easy ways to transgress, right? You just show more than the norm, and you've automatically transgressed. What I love about The Room is it doesn't use either one of those to transgress. It's just a different kind of movie. It feels like a movie that's struggling to be a certain type of movie, and in that struggle you see it, and that's interesting, surprising, and it is a transgression from the norm in a sense. So surprise is huge. Surprise is good for your brain, right? And there are data to indicate that surprise leads to sort of searching behavior. So you surprise me early on in the movie, I'm going to be searching it as I watch it. If you don't surprise me, I'm not going to be searching as much. So I think that you can transgress in many different ways. And surprise, yeah, they all lead to surprise, which keeps you interested.
So this issue of surprise,
Yeah.
and like Greg, what you mentioned is sort of 15 minutes, you're kind of in and you're out, right? I'm curious to know, like, especially now in this world where entertainment on demand is everywhere, right? Has that changed the sort of time scale? Because if I'm like, I got 20 movies I could stream, right? It's not like I went to the theater and I spent my money and, oh yeah, they told me I can't get it back, right? Because then you're invested in it. But here it's like, do you have to hook them within two minutes before you just switch to something else?
It's a lot harder now, because think about when we were growing up, Back to the Future was in the theater for like a year. Star Wars was out for like 56 weeks at the same theater. So movies got a chance to really get seen, get talked about, covered. Now you have movies that are coming out, I mean, one of the biggest franchises, Halloween, is coming out same-day streaming. So,
Mm.
you know, a year ago, how many people are still talking about the last one that came out? Nobody really, a lot of people didn't see it, a lot of people don't really care. So it's a lot harder to have a genuine cult film now with social media. The burnout is really fast. You know, movie will come out and then it'll be out on, you know, DVD like a month later, and then it's on to the next thing. So it's a lot harder to find that genuine cult movie that, like a Rocky Horror, you know, a Back to the Future, that really connects in a deep way.
Perhaps getting back to some of that word of mouth you described, right? It needs to have time to breathe and to gather, you know, not just, you know, what you see in terms of a review or a trailer, but this idea of, I saw it, now I'm telling you.
Yeah, the other thing is with the social media, like now you don't know what's sincere and what's not sincere. How much are paid ads or how much is someone being paid to say this? Back then, it just had to really resonate. You know, it had to take time, and people either, you couldn't really control people's opinion as much back then. And then also that goes the same with the content. You know, now there's a lot of knockoffs. Like, I mean, within a month, there's a Johnny Depp trial show that's already out about the trial and the people playing Johnny Depp. Back then, the creator, I think, was more original because you didn't have access to so much. You had to work a lot harder to get stuff. So they were making things that were much more genuine to them because they didn't have all that influence so available. I mean, you go to like a VHS store and wait and try to see if you could rent a VHS. A lot of times they were rented out.
Yeah.
You made your choices a lot more deliberate. Like you would go there, your whole night was based around choosing a movie there, and then you commit to it. Now you can watch 4 movies in a night and zone out, watch 10 minutes of it on to the next. It's just a lot, everything's a lot quicker, so it's definitely a lot harder.
It's so quick that it's real time. So I'm on a little project where we're looking at HBO's Watchmen, and we collected tweets during the show. And you can, if you classify the tweets into surprise versus judgment, it looks like a single human brain. Surprise peaks come first, followed by cognitive judgment peaks slowly after, you know. And people are influencing each other on Twitter as they watch it. And the influence of the social media, I personally try not to, because I would like to watch it myself first and form my own opinion, and then use the Twitterverse or whatever later to see how people are talking. But it can have a huge impact, and it's so fast that it's, and these things are so expensive to make, right? Movies are so expensive to make that I get concerned that we may be curtailing creativity. I love The Room. I love, you know, Plan 9 from Outer Space, because diversity rocks when you're a creative. You need all kinds of different stuff to just see what's possible. And when it's so easy to cancel a show now, and people have to invest so much money to make it, I'm scared that we may stifle some creativity, which is something I'm not about at all. So.
Well, I think that, I mean, we see it now with Star Wars. I mean, you had those 3 originals that was Star Wars, that was sort of what the story was, and I mean, how many movies, how many shows has come trying to sort of still use that core, you know? And at the time, nobody wanted Star Wars. When they were making it, they said this is unsayable dialogue, it's, who's gonna wanna watch this like soap opera in space, like no one's gonna care. Then it works, and then they all try to like recreate that for years, you know? So, that's the other thing is, yeah, a lot less risk taking on movies. And that was one of the things when I wrote The Disaster Artist, I was like, this is my goal with the story, is for it to become a movie like Ed Wood, like Sunset Boulevard. You know, and when I was talking to the agent who really loved the book, he's like, don't say those titles, nobody will want to make it because Ed Wood didn't make enough money. But Ed Wood is such a great film, you know? And so I was like, oh, so they're not really looking to tell something unique and make a unique movie, they're just thinking how many tickets we're going to sell.
Right.
So.
I want to make sure I don't forget about the audience.
Come on. Someone wants to ask a question, make a comment.
I guess movies like Back to the Future, do you think when they made the movie, they thought it would become a cult movie?
So the story about Back to the Future, the director had made a few movies that hadn't worked, with Steven Spielberg producing. He was a young guy out of USC. And so the script for Back to the Future came along, and I think they wanted to call it like Spaceman from Mars or something like that. So they made the movie, and then they thought the title was really bad or whatever. They did some test screenings, and the movie scored really high. So they thought, okay, let's bump this movie, let's release it during like the summer, 4th of July weekend. So I think they had high hopes. And the funny thing about Back to the Future is they had shot a portion of it with a different actor. They had cast this other actor, because Michael J. Fox was busy shooting a TV show and he couldn't do it. So they shot a portion of the movie and they sat with Steven Spielberg and they were watching the dailies and they're like, it's just not funny. Like, we're not getting any laughs through these scenes. There should be, like, and so they changed the schedule. They offered Michael J. Fox the role and reshot the entire movie. So they must have believed in it. But yeah, I mean, you could never expect that it would have that kind of response. And so that's sort of the beauty of movie making as well. You have no idea. But no, I don't think they expected it to be a cult movie. But again, what did it have? That DeLorean. First time I'd ever seen a car like that. Again, it's never a car I'd ever be interested in, but the way they made it in that film made it really cool. You know, I'm still, I was at Universal Studios, and here, 30 years later, they have that car out, and people are still taking photos with it.
It's when you talk about Back to the Future, when it came out in the 80s, I think it might have been 85, the baby boomers that I met who were watching that show, that was a nostalgia fest for them, because they grew up in that era, right? So it's interesting because one of the things that makes cult films culty is a sort of nostalgia. You talked earlier about connecting to it later. That film is a nostalgia fest for people raised in the 50s, right? And no, I just made that connection.
Yeah, the idea for the script actually came, the writer went back to see his parents, and he came across an old yearbook, and he saw a picture of his dad in high school, and he's like, I wonder if my dad and I would have been friends.
Yeah, there you go.
And that was sort of the seed to write that story.
Yeah.
Well, it also has quotable lines as
Oh,
well.
definitely.
And you've got the 1.2
Great
gigawatts.
objects.
Yeah.
Great object.
Yeah, Darth Vader will melt my brain.
Yes.
Bring back Star Wars.
With Eddie Van Halen playing.
Ah.
I really love Rocky Horror Picture Show. I just watched it last night, and like me watching it now, it's like I'm able to connect it to like LGBTQ plus communities and like social communities and like how we interact with one another between like race, gender, class, all of that. So if I'm thinking about it like that now, like what was the thought process behind when it actually came out? Because it came out when my mom was born. She doesn't really remember it, so I'm like, it must have hit a certain demographic.
Yeah, so it came out in 1975, and it was a complete miss. Like Fox was like, they didn't even know what it was going to be, and so it completely missed when it first came out. But then people discovered it, and they loved the music, and they sort of recreated a whole cult around it, and then it started doing midnight screenings. And it would play once a month or once a week at certain theaters on Saturday night. People kept showing up for it, and I think it just, they marketed it as something that it wasn't. And then I think, so that didn't work upon release, but then people discovered it and turned it into what it is now. So I think it, and the producer of it talked about it. He said, we thought it was going to be sort of like an offbeat musical, and people did not get it at all. So it's sort of cool that whoever found it, they kept it alive this long.
Yeah, because it started as a play, which is the Rocky Horror Show, and Richard O'Brien, I mean, many of the original cast, it was started in this like upstairs theater, and so it was very much sort of a niche underground kind of thing to begin with, and they really, there were several things that O'Brien sort of a lot of the references in there were things that he enjoyed that influenced him, so he wanted some of the B horror element of things in there. But also, he wanted to make what he considered to be a sort of a true rock musical. So I think he had just was originally part of a cast of Jesus Christ Superstar,
Yeah, exactly.
and then left that cast, and there were a couple other sort of rock musicals at the time, but he's like, but this is rock and roll. Where's the sort of the in-your-face sexuality, the swagger, the he was very inspired, for example, by Alice Cooper, David Bowie, things like that, and put all of that into the play, and then translated into the film version.
Yeah, that was the time of Godspell, Jesus Christ Superstar, you know, those were all rock operas. Tommy as well, so everybody was doing their rock opera. The thing about it, you had mentioned transgressions earlier. Frankenfurter was a transgressive character in '75. A transvestite, who was the lead character, was not something we'd seen. Bisexual was not something that we'd seen. So it really was pushing an envelope, and I think that transgression, that pushing the norm, shock value, if you like, had something to do with its appeal. And the midnight shows, absolutely.
And that you could go out not only to a show at midnight, but it had a party around it, right?
Yes,
it was a party. You started at
Yes.
midnight, but the film actually didn't start until 2 a.m. You had
Yes.
all of the initiation ceremonies and things that went beforehand. Then after the film, then you went out and drank more afterwards, and so, I think I saw your hand.
I guess I have a follow-up question, and you spoke a little bit about it, but in the film, there was a lot of very controversial ideas, right?
Mhm.
And I guess my question would be, in what ways, or if any, do you think the film may have influenced the culture now, and what film is like now?
So homosexuality was a diagnosable mental disorder up until 1975.
Right.
The DSM-3, which is what we use to classify mental disorders, had homosexuality in it until 1975. This is so there was a movement in the 70s, a gay expression, moving gay identity into the culture more. I don't remember the name of the club. But there were gay protests, gay marches going on. So Rocky Horror was tapping into that and tapping that vibe in terms of what was going on in the culture. So, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about it. It starts off a bunch of people working together in a theater, rolls up into another group of people, and suddenly it becomes a cultural movement. Right? So I definitely think it was in that space at that time. That would be my answer.
I was curious how you guys think about the interaction between non-whatever language and spoken, basically foreign films, and then also relative to other countries. Just like this aspect of having to read the subtitles of it,
Oh.
Yeah, I always thought, like, man, how's The Room gonna play in places you have to dub it? And it found a huge audience in Japan, Germany, and Portugal, and China. So there's something, I think, these films can translate whatever's there that works through, you know, they don't even have subtitles, I don't think. So, yeah, that was fascinating for me to know that whatever that weirdness is can translate over languages.
yeah, I was wondering, like, I mean, it's a different experience of watching it, having to read. You just interact with the movie differently, and particularly the social aspect of cult films.
You know, that's interesting because we don't know who went to see it in Japan. We don't know who went to see it in Germany. And just like you talked earlier about certain creative types being drawn to going to see The Room when it was mentioned, and brought to their attention. We don't know if it's more curious types of people from those cultures that went. It could also be the case that, you know, in those cultures, they actually are more than monolingual, right? And a lot of them actually speak English. So I'm just saying there's a whole bunch of there are things that are going on that may be more than just, you know, the visual aspect of the flick. Right? That's an interesting question. There's a whole study there, man, you know, the international understanding of the room.
Well, and I like this question of sort of the more active consumption nature of reading subtitles. I know
Yeah.
Scott and I have done a lot of work on scholarship of comics, and people discuss how with comics you have the integration of the visual and the textual. And in this case, particularly just speaking for myself and people I know who might watch films with a lot of subtitles, the first few times you do it, it's hard to be like, okay, I'm watching, I'm reading, I'm watching, I'm reading, and eventually, if you do it enough, you get used to being able to go back and forth, similar with comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but early on, it is really hard, and especially if some films I've watched where I watch with a lot of, I'm just English films now because I'm starting to develop hearing issues. I watch a lot of subtitles as well, and it really is jarring for me when I know what they're saying or I'm reading lips a little bit, and then the subtitle does not match the audio. So it's this sort of conflicting bits of information. Yeah, so it's this idea of being much more active is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I watch a little more something, I mean, I'm used to it, but even then you still have the, like, if you, it's so much easier to miss something if you're just slightly distracted at any point, and then more, it would allow, seeming to me, a lot harder interaction without having to, like, without pausing and everything,
Right.
between audience members.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you gotta read it, you're not paying attention to
Sorry, my mind started the design studies there. But now is not the time for that.
it. Exactly.
Any question from the audience? Yeah.
I know we talked a little bit about the evolution of like maybe us being in a cult culture, or the evolution of how Hollywood and the media industry goes about creating movies. I'm wondering the difference between what you interpret as the difference between a successful movie and a cult classic, like a cult movie which we talked about, but also is Hollywood with this or media industry going for success, or are they going for cult? And how do you approach those different ways of like that media industry aspect, like lens?
I think cult is designed by the people. I think it's, you know, to see if a film really worked, I think you gotta wait 10 years to see how it, you know, are people still watching it, people still talking about it, did it influence other films. I think Hollywood goes for the quick burn, opening weekend, they're like, oh, but second week it'll drop off, let's get it to Blu-ray. They don't really a cult film takes like roots and time to grow. And I think their idea of being a cult film is great. I mean, I think they hope, but I think they're more focused on immediate, you know, first week on streaming. And then I know when I did The Disaster Artist, we released it, the publisher had a, you know, publicist for 2 weeks who were getting it out there, and then they like completely moved on to something else. I was like, you can't take 2 weeks to have it grow. So I did so much of the legwork to get it out there, to get people reading it, and then by doing that, I ended up getting a copy into James Franco's hands, who would have never read it, you didn't continue to like push it and get it out there. So I think they hit quick and then move on. So I think, and then they just hope that one of them connects, and so yeah, I think cult is developed by the people, by passion.
If you ask my 21-year-old what a cult film is, it's people playing Minecraft on YouTube. I mean, what I mean is the YouTube is it democratizes video creativity in ways. There are movies on YouTube people just made and put them there. That may very well be the breeding ground for that generation's cult, right? Because Hollywood might end up being too slow, right, for this generation. I think, you know, you mentioned one of the latest Halloween's going straight to streaming, right? They got to get in there quick, and so we'll see. I mean, it's not people sitting in front of their on a couch watching a VHS cassette of Superman together. Creativity on YouTube is crazy everywhere, and we'll see. what 10 years from now is the cult YouTube movie, right? Or the cult YouTube channel or whatever. I mean, it's constant. And what I love about it, and I'll say this and I'll shut up then, I love that Ed Wood existed. I love that Roland Emmerich exists. These are people that are making movies we might call B. We might say they're not good. I want it all. And I want it all to be available. And there's something that YouTube's doing that maybe wasn't possible 30 years ago. So,
We've only got a couple minutes left, but I want, so time for one more question. I want to give our special guest the last word. You've got your directorial debut, Miracle Valley, right? It's an independent film. It's showing tonight at the Normal Theater conveniently, so please come out.
It's secretly a Back to the Future sequel, but.
Oh, all right, this is the alternative, this is the other timeline divergence, right? So, making, your own film, doing the indie thing, how, contrasting to the Hollywood thing that you all been talking about, how do you approach marketing this, getting it out there for people to know in this sort of new world?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was that I wanted to play in theaters, because every movie experience I've had that I truly remember has always been in a theater with a crowd. We made it just as the pandemic was starting, so we had time to, to work on it. And people were like, oh, we'll take it, we'll put it on streaming, and I kind of held out thinking, as soon as this is done, I definitely want to get it into festivals so people can see it with the crowd. And I was really happy I did that, because the first test screening we did in Philadelphia, people were like laughing and cheering in spots I had no idea were even funny. I tend to be in movies that are like that. So, so the biggest thing is giving it a chance. I love Halloween, I love horror season, to give it a chance to have it play with the crowd. And luckily over the years, between the disaster artists in the room, I've developed contacts that are in the mainstream press, so they can help, still get that sweet spot where you're still promoting it, but still being loyal to movies, a classic release, so you're getting to put it in theaters, and then, streaming obviously has its benefits, so people can watch it, so watch it at home, have a party, but that way you're getting a chance for the movie to live in both platforms.
Excellent. Sort of, pulling on two different sets of experiences, right? There's the sort of immersive, I'm in a theater, right, with others,
Yeah.
but it's still you and the screen, mostly. But then this idea of being at home streaming, there's probably a lot more chatting. And
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna have the same experience, but at least people that appreciate film will hopefully still have a good experience.
yeah, and there's a trade-off between the theater versus being at home with friends. Like when you and I went to go see It in the theater, there was someone got the bad guy. And they were, and this person shows, yeah, take that, right? And we all heard it, and we all died laughing. That's not going to happen with a small group, right? So the bigger theater, and my God, the sound in theater these days is just off the hook. Those things are real. There's more surprise possible with a whole group of people in the room versus just your friends. So they're both, there's a give and take either way, and it's good that you had the opportunity to do both. That would be fantastic.
Well, so here at the end of the panel, I at least first want to thank you all for coming. We're going to tell you where you can find us. So conveniently behind me on the screen, you can find me in the Department of Psychology's webpage. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Wesselmann. And then I do a lot of work with the Normal Theater, co-organizing a cult film series. And so you scan the QR code, and that can take you to some of the essays that I've written where I talk about the psychological implications of cult films. And then you've got the clicker. So next slide.
There you go. Well, first of all, thank you, Eric, for doing the legwork to organize this. And Greg, it was awesome to share a panel with you and talk about these things. I appreciate the give and take, just like I appreciate all creativity. You can find me on YouTube at Dark Loops Productions, where I run a podcast where I try to talk about pop culture, science, philosophy, always bringing it back to lived life. That's always the point. That little QR code will take you to that page. I also organize a thing on campus called ReggieCon, where we celebrate the History Heritage Months that are being celebrated nationally. We celebrate them in a 1.5 hour Zoom conversation with the discussion usually of a graphic novel that's on the theme of the month being celebrated. And so we'll do about 8 of those this year, so please come check it out. Thanks.
And then last, but certainly not least, our special guest.
I got one job. And
I mean, did you have to be a doctor to get a QR code? I see how it is.
Oh, it's that legwork thing, man. We both went out and created those things.
But, yeah, I do a lot of traveling and a lot of stuff. I always try to share kind of a snapshot of things I'm up to, so.
And then any teasers for the event tonight that you want to give?
Yeah, we're gonna do a Q&A, and you get to see Miracle Valley in the theater, so, like you were saying, with the good sound and all that, so.
Yeah.
You want to get started with Halloween season, come on out and check it out.
You can get your own autographed copy.
And then you can stay and watch The Room. Those first 15 minutes. You can leave after that,
There you
it'll
go.
change the rest.
All right, well, thank you again to my guests.